No, it's right on the, oh, well, it's just an on, but like, it just comes to do, I mean, it was terrible. No, it's a couple blocks. We haven't seen what it is. It's still left. We are actually deciding to get a salt shed, talk about how things are.
Just to get started, hey Greg, sorry, go ahead and get started. So we unfortunately don't have Representative Eagle with us today. She had to attend due to a family matter, so she had asked me if I would go ahead and share the meeting, and I said I was happy to do that. We will have her back with us next month. But it is just good to see everybody. I'm really excited to have a meeting where we have our solid waste management plan. Really want to thank the TDS staff for putting that together. I know that was a huge effort, especially for Paige and Mike Mark in particular. So what we've got on our agenda for today, I thought we could do a quick preview. We've got a few changes in the membership of this group. We'll be introducing some new members. We will be hearing from Mike Wimsatt about the new solid waste management plan and some information that we heard from the public input that came in, the comments on the plan. We'll also be talking about our report for our group that is due at the end of November. So we have our initial report that's due at the end of November, and then we don't have another report that is due for another 4 years. So this is really an important meeting for us to think about what our next steps as a group will be. And then that brings us on to the next part of our agenda, which is really reviewing our duties as a group, including the new ones that were added on recently, and identifying really where we want to go from here, say the next year of our group's meetings, and then talking about future meetings and stuff. And I don't see it on the agenda, but I'm hoping we'll have some time at the end just for any updates from the group. For example, recycling market pricing is pretty poor right now, and I thought we might want to have a brief discussion about that, at least for anyone who's not up to speed on that, and maybe any other people who have a couple of other updates.
Should we put the review of our charge before we do that before our report?
I actually kind of had the same thought as I was looking through the agenda this morning, because obviously they're interrelated, but as we think about our report and what we want to include in that report, I would not be opposed to switching those. I was, think that's a good idea, because I had kind of been thought. So I'm on board with that. If we want to start reviewing our duties, talking about our next steps, and then we can turn that back to what our report looks like and other so just to kick off, I hope everybody got a chance to look at the minutes from our meeting in July. Do we have anyone who'd like to make a motion to approve those minutes? Any discussion on this? Any corrections? All right, great. don't normally vote all of us on the minutes, I don't really. Okay, so in terms of new membership on our group, so as some of you might have heard, Mark Morgan, who serves on this group representing publicly owned in-state landfills, who's the solid waste manager for the city of Lebanon, he's actually taken a new position. It's going to be out of state, so he'll be moving to New York for a new role, which means that he unfortunately won't be able to serve on this group anymore. He's really been a great asset. I know he was really hoping to make this meeting today, but ultimately wasn't able to because he's got a lot on his plate as he wraps up his last week. So my understanding is that that is a position that is to be filled by DES. No, Mike, if there's any updates on filling that role, I know it's a pretty narrow role in terms of how you can fill that position.
Yeah, and I don't think we have anything to report on that, but I would expect them to certainly.
Then we also have Brian Patno, who was with the city, or excuse me, with the town of Lancaster. He was our representative for rural communities for source separated recycling. And actually he joined the Northeast Resource Recovery Association about a month ago as our new member services manager. And as such, that means that he's no longer eligible to fill in this role, unfortunately. And so we are fortunate to have Ben Boyd, who was appointed by the New Hampshire Municipal Association to fill that role. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ben Boyd. I'm manager of local recycling, a small community, about 4,000 people. I think Duncan Watson knows the area. And actually, I recently took over as the manager of spitballing. So I run both facilities. It's, as you might expect, quite a bit of juggling and work, but I've got a really good handle on small community recycling, especially in southwestern New Hampshire. So I'm also on the board of trustees for the NRRA. And I work closely with Recycling Partnership. Keith Harrison set me up with a trip to Texas to check out their National Recycling Conference in August. It was just a lot of fun. I got to meet a lot of high-level people in the recycling industry, and to come from a small community and sort of make a mark in the state and see where people from our community are going with this industry, kind of gives me a lot of insight into where what we can do in small communities. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this, and I hope to help wherever I can.
Okay. And then do we have?
Not yet, Megan.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I don't
the last membership change on the group is that the Northeast Recycling Council had a representative on the working group, and Lynn Rubenstein has retired as of the end of last month. And so NERC actually just had a new executive director join them on Monday of this week, and that's Megan Montes, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And hopefully she'll be able to join us for the meeting. If so, I think she's going to join us online.
Yeah.
But at least for Ben's benefit, I think it'd be good if we just went around the room and gave our name and where we work and sort of who we represent on this group.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Baji of Waste Management, and I'm representing private sector that operates the landfill in our state.
I'm Jim Malley. I'm with the University System in New Hampshire, but also teach the solid waste sector for our students.
That unit.
I'm Greg Leahy, and in CD Recycling. I'm Ben Boucher. I work for the Coca-Cola Facilities, and I represent the water industry. Eric Steinhauser, I work for Stanley and Associates. I'm on the Waste Management Council and the representative.
We know each other. I'm Reagan Bisnet with the Northeast Resource Recovery Association. Our organization has a representative to represent communities that recycle.
And Adam Clark, I'm with the city of Concord. represent here, municipality, cities that consider recycling. But then I work for years. Up there. Our guys. That's
Glad to have you with us. To have a presentation from my town. Duncan Watts, this is the Public Works Director of the city.
Hi there, I'm Jim Gray. I'm the state senator from District 6. Just a note, all of us representatives, senators on this group are up for re-election. Karen, myself, and Representative Pearl. And so there'll be some faces probably that will change the next time you have a meeting. So just keep that in mind.
My name is Frida Harris. I'm from Elliott Hospital and I'm here representing the health industry.
Good morning, my name is Mike Winstat, Service Director of the Waste Management for Commission DBS.
And I believe we have Matt Hughes online.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you great.
Yeah, good morning, all. Matt Hughes, Wind Waste Innovations, representing in New Hampshire the waste to energy sector.
Is there anyone else online? No, we're good. Okay. Great. All right. So welcome. Glad to have you join us. And I guess we'll see if we have anyone else joining us at our next meeting. So next up on our agenda is for Mike Winstat to give us an overview of our new solid waste management. We're very excited to have you.
Great. So morning, everybody. Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank this group, which provided a lot of very helpful guidance and comment on the solid waste management plan. We're really pleased. I don't think it's seen anybody that we've been overdue to make this update to the solid waste management plan for many years now. So we are so pleased and so proud to have this thing prepared and published, and we're excited more than anything to get working. So again, many thanks to the many commenters as well as certainly this group for its guidance over the last year. We started talking about this about a year ago. Solid waste working with first beginning meeting. So many thanks. So I think my charge this morning, I mean, we plans been published, and actually there's distributing copies to everyone. Really, I think my charge this morning was to talk about, in general terms, what we got for comments and how we address those comments in the plan. And we did receive a lot of comments from about 180 commenters, some 100 pages of comments, which we did review very carefully. And we kind of, as you always do when you get comments on a document, like this kind of group them. A lot of comments focused on similar themes, so we grouped them, and there were a number of groups that we looked at, some of which we were able to make some changes that we thought would strengthen and improve the plan. Other areas where we didn't even necessarily disagree with the comments, maybe it was something that wasn't necessarily appropriate to incorporate in the plan, or this kind of a plan wasn't appropriate to act on those comments. So I want to just go over both of those categories for just a few minutes here. First of all, we talked about the things we changed. There were some comments, and actually I think it was most specifically from our chair, Representative Evil, that we're looking for a little more sort of excitement, a little more heart, a little bit more emphasis on why this issue of solid waste management in our state is so important. And we did, obviously this is a legislative plan or a statutory plan that has specific instructions on what it's to address and what it's supposed to contain. So we didn't go crazy, but we did try to provide some additional context in the introductory part of the plan to kind of explain and emphasize how important solid waste management is in our state and why it's such an important topic right now. So we changes started early in the document with regard to that. We also received comments, in discussions as we were leading up to publication, it became clear that while there was a lot of discussion about the new waste reduction goal that was implemented within the past couple of years in the legislature, there was one area that was really misunderstood, and that was that waste reduction goal applies to all waste disposed in the state, not just in the state.
practice. And that was something that I think even to some members of this working group was not understood. So we put some language in to make it really clear that what the waste reduction goal means and how we believe we are to basically read the statute, how we are to and work towards achieving the goal. We also, along those lines, quantified the disposal reduction targets that we believe, the law that established the waste reduction goal was very clear that we were to use the 2018 numbers as a baseline, calculating percentage reductions and what that meant. So we did that, used that data, and then we published in the plan what those actual reduction targets are in tons. We talked about the percentages, they're really interested in the numbers. So we clarified that in terms of tonnage that was need to be disclosed or reduced. And then we also added the references, a lot of discussion, comments centered on how the Commerce Clause interacts with it, and how it impacts our permitting of disposal facilities. And so we did add some references and information about the Commerce Clause and how that impacts our work. We also clarified in several areas of the document the importance of developing new and expanded infrastructure for diversion. There were a number of commenters who recognized correctly that improving and increasing our infrastructure for the kinds of facilities that can help us to achieve diversion is vital. And we want to make sure that that was really clearly articulated in that regard. Also, we received comments that primary goal of reaching the disposal reduction goal that is in the statute is in and of itself a goal, and in the plan it's not identified as one of our specific enumerated goals. But so I think that was misunderstood. We see that really many of the goals and strategies and actions that are articulated in the plan are intended to reach that overarching waste reduction goal. So we see that as kind of the master goal. Try to put some language in that made that clear. And then lastly, we clarified that the interrelationship between the waste characterization study and the data that it would provide and other steps are going to be important as we evaluate legislative issues. So we basically clarified that we need to do that waste characterization study to help us to determine where we may want to be in the future on specific legislative initiatives. So there's some language in the plan that helps to clarify it. So those were the main areas where we made changes based on the comments that we received. There were a few things, and they were really articulated in the cover letter that the cover memo that the commission provided that comes along with the plan. That's the first thing you see. And I want to spend a little bit of time just discussing that. So there were a number of commenters who really urged DBS to take a more direct role in advancing specific purposes, in committing to either implementing things that were not yet in law or committing to advancing specific pieces of legislation. And you'll note that throughout the plan, we talked a lot about exploring and working on various pieces of legislation that may well help to advance our goals. But the plan doesn't commit to absolutely advancing a specific piece of legislation support. And what we tried to explain, I think the commissioners will explain, is we do play a very active role in the legislative process. We always have, and we expect to continue to do that with respect to solid waste initiatives. But we don't act unilaterally. And so for us to be looking at a 10-year high-level plan and saying these are the 10 pieces of legislation that we are going to absolutely advance and advocate for wouldn't really be appropriate. We tried to explain in that letter why that would be the case. So we will, to be clear, I hope everyone understands, we will continue to play a very active role in the legislative process. And there will be bills that we support full-throated. There'll be bills that we may not take a position on, but we may participate in the legislative process to answer questions of the legislators. And there may be bills that we don't support. And that really is something that gets determined on a year-to-year basis. So if anybody read this to me, we were going to sit on our hands with respect to legislation. That's not at all. But I would also emphasize that legislation is a multi-party game, right? There's the legislators, there's the agency, there are a host of stakeholders who participate in the legislative process. And as these bills that are related to solid waste come forward, everybody's going to need to play their role in actively participating in monitoring and where appropriate advocating for those pieces of legislation. There are also a number of comments that call for more specificity. There's, I think, some frustration about that. And our view, I think, is that it is a 10-year plan. There's a lot that's going to happen in 10 years. And there's a lot that can change. There's a lot that we will do that will inform us. There are a lot of things that will just happen that we'll need to observe that will inform the work that we do. And so really only after, for example, one of the things we really want to do early on, I think we can have an opportunity to do that, is to complete the waste characterization study. And that study will help to inform a lot of the things that we do, specific actions we may have to take over time. So we're really looking at this plan as a high-level plan that describes the overarching goals that we're looking to achieve, and then specificity is going to come. That kind of plays in a related comment, and that was that a lot of commenters wanted us to describe how the plan, how it will be implemented, and include very detailed tasks, assignments, deadlines, and metrics. And we resisted doing that because in many cases, this is going to be a very changing thing over this time. Things like the waste characterization study, things like legislation, how that advances or doesn't advance, will really inform a lot of the very specific things that we do. We also plan to have much shorter term implementation plans that we'll be preparing at least every year. And those plans will really direct our work. There won't be published plans that are they won't be part of this published 10-year plan. The work that we're doing that we'll be sharing and discussing in this group and others who have a human interest in solid waste. And I think that, again, we sense some frustration that folks thought if this plan doesn't have a list of 100 things that we're actually going to do, who's going to do them, and when we're going to do them by, that it's not effective. The plan really is going to inform our work, and it's going to be certainly something that we look to frequently as we develop these shorter-term implementation plans. And I think it'll be a document that informs the members of this group and other stakeholders as we advance our work. So that's really a high-level view of what we saw, comments, how we chose to address them. And certainly we haven't taken any questions, but I want to emphasize that we're really pleased to have this plan published, and we're really excited to do it.
So strategically, you're talking about doing like 1 year implementation plan, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So when does what does the timeline look like for that in terms of budget, in terms of legislative session? When do you anticipate the year cycle?
Well, I think we're working on that now. But we also publishing. I don't want to say that something's going to be done in a certain month of every year, but it will always have a current short-term implementation that we'll be working with. Those may change based on experiences and things that happen.
I just didn't know if there's a certain time of year you have to run budget session. Is there a time that it makes the most sense to kind of gear up so to speak, right for your next?
Well, certainly we have a biennial budget process which we work on. This summer we put it through the agency phase. And then that goes through until the governor savings account. Excuse me. In February, the governor will present the budget to the legislature. So that process will go and hopefully culminates in an approved budget by the end of June. So certainly the budget is part of that. For us in solid waste right now, the budget is largely a operations budget that includes personnel and overhead and all that. It doesn't, there is current, other than our sort of legacy solid waste land closure grant program, we don't have any real capital issues in that budget. However, that could change. The legislature did pass a law establishing solid waste management fund. It doesn't have any money in it, but but, we're hoping that we can change that, with future actions. We do anticipate getting, some, and we've actually, basically made provision for it in the budget we've prepared. We do anticipate getting, it could be a substantial grant from EPA in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And we think that we're still really unclear what that's going to look like, what the numbers are going to be, but we're pretty confident that we will be able to fund the waste segmentation study with that grant. So that's a grant that we could be applying for in the next few months. The EPA is struggling. This is a new program for them, so they're, on the one hand, they're trying to get it launched, and they still haven't figured out what it's going to look like. And so the information is a little sketchy at present, but we assume they'll pull it all together in the next couple of months and we'll have an opportunity to apply for that. So that's something that we've made provision for in our new budget. The line item for these, and we anticipate that we might actually need to go to the fiscal committee. We may actually get that money earlier than when we have a new budget. So we would actually go to the fiscal committee to set up these funds. So there's a lot in play right now, and that's really driving us. That's kind of, I think if I was going to identify one of the main things we're looking for the first implementation plan and studying the way to
so if the funding is sufficient, do you think the department would try to do a waste characterization and a waste generation study at the same time, or just start with the waste generation study?
I don't know, Mike, you have any thoughts on that?
I think the two could be interrelated. And have one approach that you could probably use the same consulting firm to do essentially the same thing, because the waste characterization data can be used to extrapolate for generation. Estimating generation statewide. So I think the two are kind of interrelated, probably could be.
I would agree with that. I think that's what we need to kind of think of them together, I guess, if you understand.
And I know that so that funding would come from the EPA recycling education grants. Is there any thought that the department might pursue, without knowing all the details of it yet, the EPA's new infrastructure grants, which I know that states can apply for, even though we don't know what that application process looks like yet?
I think once we understand what we're eligible for and what we can use for, we're going to go after as much as we can. I'm a little confused. I think the grant that I've been talking about is really what into what EPA would call state and territorial assistance grant staff, that we would call staff. I was under the impression that infrastructure grants states could not apply. So maybe I'm misunderstanding that.
It's my understanding that states can apply for the infrastructure grants, and it can be a private-public partnership type of thing. But again, they don't have the details out yet.
Yeah.
But at least in the initial eligibility, they list states. So.
Yeah, well, and that maybe because we've had some conversations with the EPA. One of the things that we've asked her specifically is could we go after one of those grants? The idea that we would then administer sub-grants. We've got a pretty firm no in that. But maybe the nuance is that what you're implying is that the state would need to be an actual partner in presumably getting them to construct and operate some kind of thing. So that may be not really clear to me right now with the vision.
Any questions?
And just to clarify on the EPA, my understanding is that there's essentially three categories of money. There's this ag grant that you're referring to about money that's essentially states will be eligible for use of for planning and implementation purposes, like implementing a solid waste management, or doing waste characterization studies or data and research, information management. So that's one pot of money.
then there's two other kind of, and that's, the state money is not, competitive. But then there's two other categories that are competitive. That's infrastructure grants that we were talking about, and also I think an education and technical assistance kind of category as well. So there's three, it gets a little confusing, there's like three different categories. We still don't really know the detail yet, but that's my understanding.
Just hearing this conversation, how do we get more information? We should have the state, have someone who can dig into the specifics as to what's available. Right, not just this group, but
Yeah.
the state.
So I think we've both spoken with the same EPA representative. Basically, the applications aren't finalized yet. So they've publicized initial information. The EPA went through a process of gathering a lot of public input. They are now, they still say that they will issue the applications in the fall. We'll certainly see them before the end of the year. But they haven't yet publicly committed to when those applications will be available, what the details are, what the dollar amounts are. So it's like we have a sense, but there's no concrete details to really dig into yet until this application is published. So that's why there's this sort of uncertainty. We know the money's going to be available, we know it's coming. We don't know all the details yet.
Well, and further to that, certainly once we do know the details better, we'll be reaching out to partners, but certainly to this group at our next meeting, I hope that we would have more specific information. This group meets again, and we'd be happy to give an overview of that so that we can help. Various networks, right? I mean, it's going to be important for people across the state from all sectors to take advantage of these funds.
I've heard that ESPIA conference last month, Spring Barrett was up there talking about all the funds the state has. It doesn't have the personnel to spend all this money.
Who said that?
Spring Barrett. Put the numbers up on the screen. It's pretty amazing. The funds that are accessible by the process.
I'm guessing a lot of it, that was about water and wastewater. And I can assure you, we have a team working night and day on that. And it is a struggle. I mean, it's more money than we would normally see over a several-year period, right? Events can do for years. And so it's a struggle, but certainly we're making sure that we don't send in.
Well, if we have a MRF that we can send liquid waste through, maybe we get some way there is money into that.
Like one of my questions was related to the first short-term implementation plan. Is there a place for this group to be helpful as the department thinks about where to get started? Because we get later in our agenda to what our next steps are. Is there a role for us in your mind that would be useful to help the department get started with that first?
Sure, I think that that's something that we would not anticipate that in a discussion topic in the future.
And then also, is there an update on the, the biennial solid waste report is sort of also an important piece for tracking progress on the plan. Is there an update on when that next report might be issued? Because the last one was 3 years ago.
Yeah, we were hoping actually to have it for today's meeting, which is two last things we're trying to button up, so I would expect that it will be published before the next meeting. I want to make sure people understand what we're trying to stay on the cycle. So what will describe the biennial period between 20 and 21. So it's not, when those folks who are on this group who are very aware of the current things that have happened in the last 12 months, it's going to be reading. We're trying so that sort of for posterity, when you go to that plan, really describes what happened during those 2 years. So it's going to be a little frustrating reading for someone who knows more about what's going on in 22, right? But we will be publishing that, and then we will be back on cycle. So that means that it will be and published for.
So that's good that we'll be able to see that before our next.
I'm gonna take off in just a few minutes, and I think you guys got this document. I want to make a comment on it. There's some very good news in here. Many years ago, Rochester became, under an order for nitrogen in the Chico River. Okay, working with waste management because the leachate that's coming from waste management was higher concentrations of nitrogen. We worked together and they had a pre-treatment which to remove the nitrogen. But when I was sitting in the fiscal committee, when this was being discussed, I also found out because they used a reverse osmosis filter at the end of this, is that it's also removing PFAS material. And so both the city of Rochester and waste management should be commended for their efforts in that. And, whether it's a monetary success or not, I can't tell you right now. They keep on doing it. And here, if you look at the report, there's about 50 million gallons of leachate that come out of turnkey because of its size. And removing the PFAS materials out of that is a tremendous thing for the state of New Hampshire and the citizens of Rochester. So, and anyone downstream of the Chico River also. I did want to mention that Representative Pearl is here, so we'll have one of us in attendance as I leave in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
We didn't coordinate that.
All right, well, Mike, thank you very much again. It's really exciting to have a plan so that we can really now dig into the next steps. And I, for one, really excited about seeing what that first short-term implementation plan will include because, I was one of the people who was eager to see some of those more specifics. And so it sounds like these short-term implementation plans are exactly where we can expect to see them, which is great. So since we agreed to swap the next two sections of our agenda, let's take a review of the responsibilities of this group. And this is a really good time to take stock of that because we have essentially 10 specific responsibilities. And Paige, I think we're going to pull them up for anybody who wants to follow along on the screen. But between these two different statutes, we have a very clear list of what our responsibilities are to accomplish in our last 4 years as a group. So the first is to assist the department in long-range planning for and the development of creative, effective solutions to the state's solid waste management challenges, which is a bit amorphous, but yes, we are working on that. The second is to specifically review and make recommendations for changes to the state's existing solid waste reduction, recycling, and management policies, programs, goals, and initiatives. The third is to review and make recommendations regarding the impact of regional solid waste management initiatives, including landfill waste disposal bans on our state and our solid waste disposal landfill capacity. The fourth is to advise the department in the development of the solid waste management plan, which we have accomplished. So we've got one of our 10 officially done because in the next 4 years, we won't be having a new solid waste management plan. You guys know. The fifth is to review and recommend methods to better provide technical assistance and educational outreach to municipalities, schools, businesses, and the public regarding solid waste reduction, recycling, and management policies. Our sixth duty is to review and recommend ways to better implement solid waste hierarchy and solid waste reduction goals. Seventh is to review and make recommendations based on the HB 617 Study Committee Report on Recycling and Solid Waste Management in New Hampshire. And then the eighth is to review any other such matters that we deem are necessary and to recommend any related legislation, policy, or rule changes. And those were our original duties that were outlined for this group. And then in addition, we had 2 additional duties that were added in this last legislative cycle. Our 9th duty is to review and make recommendations regarding municipal solid waste plans and implement the prohibition of any landfill in the state from accepting waste from a municipality that does not have a solid waste management plan. As you may recall, the state of Vermont, for example, has solid waste plans required by municipalities. And then our last duty is to review and make recommendations regarding the development of a solid waste disposal site evaluation committee or better defining alternative site analysis. So that's what we're responsible for doing. We can definitively say that we've achieved one of those 10 responsibilities since the solid waste management plan has now been published. And so the question really is, where do we go next as a group? And of course, the very short-term next is that we need to prepare our report that needs to be issued by the end of next month. But really from there, the important question is, assuming that at our next meeting, we spent time focusing on finalizing that report, when we kick off our next set of meetings, where will this group be going? And I guess part of this in my mind, gets back to my question to Mike, which is there, beyond this group helping inform or, advise by input on the short-term implementation plans, is there anything in particular in the short term that would be useful from DES perspective for this group to focus on, considering we have such a huge scope of use?
Yes, I think it's time to think about.
Sure. And for example, one thought that came to mind is I do know that DES needs to re-promulgate certain regulations, solid waste regulations, coming up. And so, for example, if there were certain regulations that need to be updated, perhaps it would be useful.
Well, on that, we are basically rules in New Hampshire, absent any other specific statutory directive, expire every 2 years. So you have to renew your rules every 2 years. And that's obviously solid waste rules, those are familiar with them. Pretty large document, cover a lot of ground. So what we've done is we've tried to break that up into sections and we're trying to work our way through rulemaking on that. Now they expire in 2024. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us to do that. So one of the things we can do, we just presented 3 sections of our rules were proposed with not a lot of major changes, but for readoption to the Waste Management Council last week. And so those will be presumably we'll be filing an initial proposal on those in the next probably in about a month or so. And then those will go through the public comment period probably in January, and then go through after comments are addressed, final proposal, the final rule will probably be published sometime in February or March. So probably March. So that's just 3 sections of the rules. As we pull those together, it would be probably appropriate for us to present those to this group at one of their its monthly meetings as they come up in the cycle. Certainly taking comments and input on as we do that. This also would be really kind of a good built-in stakeholder group and some changes we may be considering. And I think we could use this group as an already organized stakeholder group for a lot of the various sets of rules and various sections that we'll be working on. So I can see that.
Great.
One of the comments that I've heard out on the campaign trail of those people who are interested in solid waste is about all the waste that's coming in from the state. Whether that state is, not accepting the waste that they're producing, not taking action to do something in state, but those are all the perceptions that are out there, and that they don't want New Hampshire to be that dumping ground for waste from everywhere. All right, so I think that that this group, in addition to the stuff we're doing in state, needs to advocate for certain things that would be on the federal level to make sure that, that states are trying to process their own waste and not export it, or, some penalty or some additional fee, you look at the different things that we've done here about the tipping fees, different things. So again, I do have to go to the Health and Human Services Oversight Committee. I don't know why you guys try to schedule them on the same day. But that's one of the things out there that the consumers or the people that are talking to you about that, are bringing up. So with that, you dropped the bomb. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, on that topic, I guess one question is it even within the purview of the board is to be making recommendations regarding federal legislation? We need to be turning our focus to New Hampshire legislation for making that recommendation. That's clearly within the scope of our responsibilities about advocating for federal policy changes.
I guess I said with due respect to the senator, I'm not sure how much influence we can have, particularly in the short term on federal legislation. It doesn't mean it isn't worthwhile looking at that, but that's
Yeah, I was gonna ask a question, but Steve left, and I think he might be the one that might answer the question. I'll kind of throw it to Mike. We need to look for a bit till he comes back. I guess along the same vein, I'm hearing the same thing, Senator. As I think about it, I'm kind of concerned about the whole topic, how we approach it as a state, looking at it from a statutory position. I know when we get into tipping fees and the costs associated with owning and operating the landfill, it's a big topic. There's a lot of moving parts and moving pieces. And I guess I'd want us to think about it. Maybe if it's something we're going to look at, we have to think about it from a pretty in-depth level of what it costs to own and establish a landfill and manage it, and all of the things associated. And I guess a concern I have is if we go down the path of having additional fees and limiting what comes in from out of state, is there a trigger is that going to trigger something that's going to cause our municipalities to have higher tipping fees and things of that nature? I just think these are things we really need to look at and be real careful of as we wade into that conversation and that topic. I don't know, Steve, you kind of left it as I was starting. You maybe, that's okay, no, you're real. The timing is such. The senator had talked about the concerns that he was hearing on the campaign trail about waste being from other states. My concern is as we look at that, or when we look at that as a group, is I know there's a lot of costs associated with owning and operating the landfill. And the investment that it takes to put liners in and all of these things are incredibly high cost. If we start limiting or putting extra additional fees on incoming trash from incoming solid waste, what would the impact be to the local municipalities in the sense that would that put a higher cost back onto them and tipping fees, because you've still got that same investment as into the landfill. And it's not a question you can maybe answer, but it's something we should be thinking.
Just to be jealous from an economic standpoint, if you look at a facility, whatever it is, the less you take in the facility, the more cost to operate that site. So if you just restrict it to, only in-state waste, you've got infrastructure like we have right now, referring to the center of time, which is about north of beach, just an example. Those costs are considered. We apply fees in-state and out-of-state differently. I don't know how that would work from a legal standpoint. Something we could look at. But it would affect cost if restricted to that facility and any other facility that would have. You know, to what degree, I'm not really sure. That would be like something like that.
Well, the second thing that we hear about on the campaign trail is high property taxes. There's certainly any time that we're looking at making a change, which we have to understand the impact, financially that's going to have on the community, because that's one of the generators of our property. So just a thought that I had, I kind of piggyback on the Senator information.
It's sort of a universal question. Every state I work in, upstate New York, it's New York City, and nobody's really come up with a creative best fit solution, it seems to me. And there's so many conflicting points of view. I think every human being is dumping on us. Massachusetts is dumping on us. As you were saying, we sort it out. No one's come up with much of a creative solution of it. The host community to the mega landfills in upstate New York that deal with New York City, I mean, 6-7 million tons a year, haven't found much of a creative alternative either. So I'm just throwing that out that it's tough, as you said, such a tough issue. And at least half the voters, I don't think, are as opposed to it as maybe the ones that speak to you folks, you know what I mean?
Well, it's certainly an emotional issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
No question. Our job is to get that, try and balance it out, find a good path forward based on facts and science and information.
Absolutely. Just kind of a random comment about there's a book out there. It's called Defensive Garbage. I read it 20 years ago. Copy in my box and I handed it out to a few folks. It was written by the guy who was the CEO of American Can Company. There's a lot of information there. Some of it's still applicable, but the conclusion of the book, I read this, was that the U.S. has, looking at the country, huge land areas, vast land areas. Landfills will continue to be a primary source to manage solid waste in the country. And he predicted 25 years ago that there will be mega landfills in the central part of the U.S. Material will go there and be around. And I read this and I thought, this guy's crazy. That's exactly what's happening. It's, stuff that's coming out of Massachusetts, it's getting on a train, it's going out to Ohio, Indiana. We're doing that, coming out of New York City, sending it to remote locations. And that's going to continue forward. To see that, I think it's going to be more and more that happening. It's happening now. A lot of folks are, challenged trying to develop greenfield facilities in places like New England. Less of that occurring, and historically, more of that in the future, I think. And it's driven by dollars and cents. Cheaper. Dealing with a large company that got a tipping fee we put out there to take material out of Pittsburgh facility in Massachusetts. He's saying he can get it on a train, process it at the transfer station, get on a train, put it in a landfill in Alabama for less than he's going to pay us at the gate at our Pittsburgh landfill in Massachusetts. So that's kind of where things are going. Anyway. But interesting book.
I was shopping around for tipping prices for a small town, and I even did a video conference, and I was discussing how we had our tipping prices went from 85 to 115. So it was 80, 81, 83, 85, and then the next year it was 115. So I was like, well, I'm gonna look around and shop around, and I found that the rail system actually made sense. I talked to DTM, different people about it, and they were thinking it might be a good idea as well. I talked to Pennsylvania. Central Pennsylvania is $50 tipping fees, $55 tipping fees. So it's just, and then I even heard that Kentucky has $29 tipping fees. So it's just an interesting thing where I don't know all that much about it, but I know there's a variation in rail that didn't make sense to me as well. Even in a small community, could be feasible to go that.
Well, to me, that discussion is says to me that that's a complete and utter failure of our economic system and how we value things. I don't know if anybody read, there was a lot of news coverage about the UN climate panel came out with a report saying we're on the road to hell, literally. The climate emissions forecast by 2030, which was supposed to have been reduced by half by 2030, is now on pace to be 10% above the original climate agreement in Paris. Right now we're heading, at a minimum of 2 degrees Celsius change by the end of this century. Every fraction of a degree of Celsius change represents a catastrophic impact for tens of millions of people. There's going to end up being climate migration towards climate resilient areas like New England or the upper Midwest. We can't afford to be looking at economics by saying, oh, I can get $29 by shipping my crap out to the Midwest and thinking that's a solution to our problems. This is insane. We are in this spot right now, wrong, and the flame is being turned up. We're just acting like we've got all the time in the world to solve this problem. This is crazy. I mean, did anybody see the movie Don't Look Up? I mean, this is where we're at right now, people. We have got to get serious about this. I understand that New Hampshire by itself isn't going to solve the problem, but we sure as hell could be a leader in this, in addressing these things and showing the world the possible, showing a new economic model. I just think it's incumbent on us. I mean, I'm going to fight to my dying breath about this because it's serious. It represents an existential threat to my kids, and if they, God forbid, they have kids themselves, it represents a threat to them. We're talking about the fate of humanity here, and we're acting like, oh, this is just a dollar and cents thing, and how do we manage resources? Well, we should do this. This is more than that. We really ought to be factoring this in on the actions that we do in this committee. We need to be driving this train, not passengers on it, just waiting to see where we end up. Really, truly, I'm sorry, and I understand, I believe that everybody here wants the right thing, environmental protection, all that. But I think that we need to understand the stakes here are huge. They're really, really big, and it's time that we need to wake up. Really, I don't sleep at night. This is real. This is happening. We gotta wake up.
Well, I was gonna say, so Duncan, do you have some thoughts on, your recommendations for where we might want to go next in terms of
Well, I mean,
the
my
next 2 years?
comments on the solid waste plan were we need to develop infrastructure to handle our discards in ways that conserve resources more than just, waste is a huge contributor to carbon emissions. And how we handle waste can reduce carbon emissions. So yeah, and I just think that we're not going to have to 2050 to get to 45% waste conversion. The impacts of what's going to happen by 2050 if we stay business as usual right now with our very slow moving train here. I mean, remember, I've been in this business since 1992 when the solid waste plan had a 40% diversion goal by the year 2000. Here we are 22 years later after that. We're stuck in the mid-20s, maybe. I mean, we got to do better than that. We got to do it a lot sooner. We got to, as soon as the infrastructure grants come out, we need to be jumping on that and saying we're going to be the leader of this. We can't be passive about this. We've got to get on this. So yeah, I mean that's what I mean. I just think that as a committee, we need to be considerably more aggressive. And I understand Representative Pearl, you're out on a campaign trail. You hear about people. I mean, look, I pay the same gas that everybody else pays. I don't get it. But I also see that corporations are reporting record profits. So you got to wonder what's inflation and what's price gouging. But that aside, I think it's incumbent upon the elected representatives to also help to educate the public about what's really important here. I get, the economic, the day-to-day kitchen table issues, but there's a lot bigger things at stake here that people are not aware of and they need to be aware of.
That sort of fits some of our charge, and having been in education for 40 years, we're having a hard time moving the needle. Our hope was start with K through 12, get them interested. I started recycling because my kids shaved me anyway, right? and then get the undergrads and that, but we're having a hugely difficult time moving the needle. Because ultimately, like, the voters get to decide the world they want. And we just can't seem to move, and you hit it on the head. All of our worries, and I agree with you, I work with climate scientists. That gas price goes to $5 and everything you said is totally. I'm not trying to be too negative, but our hope was education. I have to say, over 40 years, we haven't moved the needle very much. So anybody around here that has a better idea, I'd love to help.
Well, the answer to that is, look at what Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island's been doing, talking about the dark money that infiltrates out there, and absolutely corrupts everything that's good about what's trying to be done. It's insidious, nefarious, and it's effective as all get out, because just look at how polling comes out, and how the climate change debate has been impacted over the years. I mean, it's really, really disturbing, and I think he's got a new book out that describes all of this, how this dark money, and I mean, we're talking about many billions of dollars that are just being poured into these efforts to confuse us. We're all sitting there confused. What's real? What's fake news? We don't know. But I'll tell you that, the vast majority of climate scientists, I think, are in a pretty good position to be giving us a warning, are telling us that we're really headed in a bad way. And we need to, and frankly, I mean, honestly, there's a whole group of climate scientists who are saying we've already passed the tipping point. It's already, everything is baked into the equation. We'll be lucky to hit 2 degrees by the end of the century. It's more likely going to be in the 4 to 6 degrees Celsius change range, which literally, is an extinction event, by the end of the century.
And so we try to use severe weather data based on insurance rates to maybe move the mark for maybe what we might call the more traditional resistance. But again, it's just so hard to move the needle. I don't mean to be negative, but I'm just trying to think, how can we help the education as well?
So much of it has to do with consumer choice, and ultimately waste is what do you do with products and goods after folks have bought it, having done its end of life, and now it's got to go somewhere. And that's the infrastructure piece, is how do you segregate materials by its source and its, primary, fabrics is great, cotton is, a natural fabric and doesn't great, but what about polyesters and all these synthetic blends that we have in these products, and, how do we segregate those items and where do they go? How does the infrastructure look to actually manage that so that the goods and services, the goods and products that people are buying, there's an output for? And that's, I think, the disconnect, is now we're after the fact trying to juggle the output of whatever John Doe consumer wants to buy. And how do you either streamline that, build the infrastructure, or I don't want to say, or incentivize the healthier choice or the wiser choice or the greener choice. So how do you do that? And how does that fit into our decision processes?
Well, I think one of the things that has been brought up for related to that is, do we make any recommendations regarding extended use responsibility that would impact what's being produced or sold in New Hampshire? I know that, advocating for certain legislation probably would sit favorably with everyone in this group, but at the same time, if we're looking at, yes, it's so hard to be on the receiving end of all of these different types of waste streams and to manage that waste, would it be more effective than to look upstream and see if there's anything that this group can recommend that would actually help us get started at the source?
If I can add on,
Absolutely.
Sorry, the solid waste committee subcommittee recently we did an interim study bill on House Bill 1111, as many of you may be following. They did recommend that instead of doing a commission, we did a study committee, because it's for those of you who don't know the difference, in the legislature, the commission is it's a much bigger group, and it's very slow moving, and it's hard to, it's not quick to act. Whereas a study committee is much more nimble from the legislative standpoint. Nothing is nimble in the legislature, but from that standpoint, it's able to move more quickly, it's able to put out recommendations more quickly. So the subcommittee did recommend to the full Environment and Ag Committee that we recommend future legislation on having the producer responsibility type legislation come forward. So we did do that. We sent that report in. So that is coming forward that the committee will recommend. So small news, and I know it isn't moving the needle at the speed that you would love, and I understand that. You have a great passion for it. I appreciate it. The harder part for us in the legislature is we have to represent, all of the people that are out there, or do our best to, while looking at it, trying to, and the lack of education that you talked about is a big piece of it. There's many people who may have different opinions of the same data that you've read and what you believe in, and that's what we have to look at, what kind of thought develops. So it isn't always a favorable place to be, and there's days that I wonder why I subject myself to it, but we do it, we all care, and that's why everyone's sitting in this room is here. Anyway,
I agree that we all care, but what the solution is might be different. With regard to Professor O'Malley's comment about thinking that education is the key to it, back in 1992 or one, I did a master's degree thesis on the critical link about how education was the key to successful recycling program. And yeah, it did point, the data that I was able to gather did point to the fact that education did move the needle a little bit, but certainly not to the extent that's necessary. And so I've sort of come around on the idea that education, while good, the education needs to be much more focused on the people who can actually make decisions, with good data, science. I don't know what else we have to be seeing in order to, to think that there's an actual crisis happening, but, we'll see. But in the meantime, what the state could do, the legislature could do is, with this public-private partnership, ask for what it is that we want. An advanced materials recovery facility that segregates not, a 25% fraction of waste stream, but a minimum 50%. Let's start there. Let's be aggressive with this. So that we can actually move this needle, because as much as I hate to say it, this problem that begins with consumers and their choices, there's no real good way to impact that. It's got producer responsibility. I don't have a problem with that, but it's complicated, to even get that through because of the interests that are against it. I think that we're going to end up having to deal with this problem at the end of the pipe, just like we do with wastewater treatment plants. We're going to have to solve this at the end using technology available to dramatically increase the amount of diversion that we do from disposal. Disposal is always going to be a part of the fraction. There's going to be, variations of waste to energy that can be done properly and efficiently, but trying to conserve these resources so they're made into new resources is really, I think, the way to go. And we need to be asking for this type of infrastructure through our public-private partner system that needs to happen immediately.
So I've been jotting down some notes about some of the themes that have come up from people's thoughts on what we might approach next in the short term. So out-of-state waste, I think you certainly heard a lot about that from comments to solid waste management plan. That's specifically one of the drivers of one of our newer duties, looking into implementing municipal solid waste plans. I think that was specifically recommended, so we can look at an avenue to reduce out-of-state waste. So in Vermont, they have solid waste implementation plans that each municipality has to adopt. And in Vermont, at least, those plans are pretty strict in terms of what standards the community has to meet in order to be able to dispose of waste in the state of Vermont. And if a community or business out of state can meet those standards, then they want to clarify something.
Just wanted to clarify, I need to look up myself, but I believe it's for business. So in Vermont, they have a very strong district solid waste management business system, but not so much that municipality, so it's important, it's always been, whoever oversees like a regional solid waste management system.
Right, and some communities don't participate in a district, they can do it on their own, but yes, because of the strong burdens of this plan, most communities are within a district to meet these requirements. Thank you. But the goal is to essentially raise the bar, raise the standards as to what communities have to do to educate, to reduce waste, to provide household hazardous waste days, to take other steps to make sure that you're reducing and you're using and recycling more before you were allowed to dispose of it. So I think that's one of the reasons why that was proposed as something we should look into, is if that model to some degree should be implemented in New Hampshire.
That all makes sense. I just don't see the difference out of school.
Well, the idea being that in Vermont, they don't get such large quantities of out-of-state waste coming into Vermont because less generators of waste out of state are it applies to anyone disposing of waste in the state. Yeah. And so it ends up limiting out-of-state waste because it's such a high bar to meet. Yeah.
But I think the state has to approve that plan.
Yes. There are certain requirements that have to be met, and then the state has to actually look at.
I just want to add just a tiny bit of context to what my statement is, because I'm not out there saying, should ban oil, nothing like that. I think what people fail to realize is that we're talking about an economic paradigm shift here. Right now, we're talking about putting our waste on the rails and sending it out to the Midwest somewhere, as opposed to keeping those resources in state and doing something with them that would dramatically increase our economic and manufacturing base. Keeping these things local. I mean, there's something for everybody. This isn't about stopping this. It's about how we look and value resources, and also how we value economics. And I think that there's a necessary shift to recognize that this is the rising tide of the possibility here. We just have to reframe this issue.
So we've got discussion of extended producer responsibility, need to address out-of-state waste and how that really is a concern that a lot of constituents are bringing up. Our need for more local infrastructure to reduce all of the costs of sending waste out of state, and then also still the continued need for education. Did I miss anything else in terms of big themes that people think we should be looking at, sort of our next steps for this group? Immediate next steps, yes?
I think something Mike said earlier, we look at the waste makeup first,
Yes.
right? So you're advocating infrastructure, I get that. But what does that look like? Like Sinstream facilities, not going to say operate them, extremely expensive. You've got mass to do it. You have to have one in the city of Manchester get commitment from someone like the co-op times 2 to send all their recyclables there, make that work financially. I know, it's the right thing to do, but if you've got a cheaper alternative and someone else is going to do something else with it, it's not going to come to that location. That's going to suffer. That doesn't work financially. It's going to be difficult to operate. Just kind of an aside, one thing I just want to know is the waste characterization study, which is important to identify where we should focus efforts in construction. One of the things that our company is doing is, this is not our company, it's another company, Exeter Agri-Energy, some of you probably know what that is. Take organics, they have mineral digesters in the state of Maine. Take food waste, produce electricity, and pull that out of the waste streams and dispose of. We've opened up some of our transfer stations in Massachusetts, where there's one of our large generators in organics. It was 1 ton a week, now it's half a ton. So those organics are coming into these transfer stations, and where this Lum's transfer station, for example, for 30 tons a day, going back to the state's record, 60 tons a day. We are taking this food waste from Shopping City, from various universities. It's aggregated, it's trucked the extra name, and the quickly digest. I think building that, base for things like food waste is something the state should take a look at. But look at this report, right? It's 22% or whatever the number that's in this report. It's a large percentage of the MSW. If we can establish a waste stream, then you've got companies that are willing to put money to build this infrastructure. We will report both courts very similar to what I explained here in Charlestown, Massachusetts, because the state of Massachusetts had implemented a waste ban that takes organics out. We thought there'd be a rush for a facility like this. It took us 2.5 years to get the thing to the point where we were getting enough to break even financially. Get to that point, it made sense now, but it was really surprising to us that it took that long for folks to do what was mandated by regulation, get enough material together to make that operation viable. So I guess the point is, if we can build a base and use assets, like this extra active energy, and then say, okay, we've got 400 tons a day, we've got 100 tons a day, whatever these materials are, then you've got folks that maybe step up to the plate and say, look, I'm going to invest $10 million because I know that instead of going to me or Ohio, I can take the process. So I guess, looking at the makeup of the waste stream, how to start that process is something that our company.
Steve, how many sorts does a single stream do?
Sorry?
How many sorts does a single stream do?
Well, it really depends on what you look at that operation. The one in the worker that we have, we're looking at about 6 or 7 different sorts.
Right, so not much different than my materials.
Yeah,
We're in the 7 range. I'm not talking about single stream.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about 6 or 7 sorts. I'm talking about a facility that would include sortation like a materials park facility, but on steroids. To then also get the organic fraction into the anaerobic digestion stream, but using, I understand, you've got your perspective on it. This technology exists, and I think it can do, we're talking about 50 to 70 sorts in what I'm calling an advanced materials recovery facility. And, I guess, I'm from Missouri too. I want to see it to make sure it works, right? But I do believe these are on the horizon and it's going to become the future. But I think we ought to be getting on that, looking at that versus, trying to figure out how to piecemeal this.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, looking at the source of these materials, where it's generated, that's what we want to know. We don't want to take organics out of the waste stream and drop them into it. Not going to happen. We're not going to. But if you go to a restaurant, you've got dedicated collection of Hannaford's, University of New Hampshire, collecting organics at the source, and we can have something to manage. But once it comes all together, it's a mess. I think education is important. Talk about that. And recycle right is critical. We've seen stuff showing up, these MRFs that are creating havoc for us. Rubber hoses, right? This is plastic. Someone's throwing away tires. Saying, well, there's a metal rim there. You use that metal. It's a problem. We're getting lithium batteries like all the time. And I got a call person this morning, 4:30 last night at a fire for Rochester. Fire department showed up, building was saved, but it was a mess. And we were tracking back lithium batteries from the source of that. So it's education is really key because we can build those infrastructure, but if we burn to the ground, we're not going to get in. So we've got to educate people as to what they can do. So,
I know early on this group looked at the not low hanging fruit, but the big items, food waste, C&D, and total mass of plastic, not just the bottles. And that seemed smart to me to go back to those kind of discussions again. To make very minor example, the UNH football stadium is zero waste, and the real thing that put it over the top was sending all the stuff to Maine and composting the food plastic. But that's
small example of a very highly managed, well-financed situation. But I agree, composting's got to somehow.
So what I'd like to suggest, I think we would definitely do for a break. When I look at the list we've got, I agree waste characterization study was high on my list of things that we want to make sure we're seeing the next year, as well as infrastructure. And then the last one that I'd like to add is, I think kind of a big one that we haven't talked about yet, but is the need for some type of reliable funding to support all of these efforts we're talking about, to support all the efforts that are outlined in the plan. So I really think that's what we need to talk about. It's a tough one, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be discussing it. So what that would bring us to is if we are thinking about what we want to cover over, say, the next year, which is really going to bring us in line to the next item on our agenda, which is what should we cover in our report. The waste characterization study, EPR, addressing out-of-state waste, infrastructure, education, and funding. And planning. And with that, I'd like to suggest that we take a 10-minute break, and then we can come back and think about how we will, what we're going to put in our draft report, sort of what we've done, and then looking ahead what we want to do next. And I think we've got a good basis for what we want to do next based on this talk.
Real quick, I'll just add something cool. So just touching back to some of those main points, kind of how we're approach them. So one in particular that I have a concern about is EPR and how we're going to approach that. So I think it's more of a walk before we run type scenario where we should bring some sort of subject matter expert in the room and try to build that education base for everyone in this room before we get any farther down the road and how it's been implemented in other states and some of the drawbacks and lessons learned before we kind of dive full on in and go crazy. That's my only recommendation, is build up an education base for everyone in here, then take the session.
I think that probably applies a bit to all these topics that we're thinking we'll dive into next, is how we're going to. I think that's on it. All right, why don't we take a 10-minute break? We can reconvene at why don't we go ahead and get started again? Still missing 1%. But I want to make sure we certainly get out of here. So the next item on our agenda, which I think our last conversation really flows nicely into it, is talking about our initial report that is due by the end of November and what we want to include in that report. So essentially, there's not a lot of detail in terms of what we need to say in that report.
No detail. It just says a report.
It says that we shall submit our initial report on November 30th, 2022. And it will go to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, President of the Senate, House Clerk, Senate Clerk, Governor, State Library, and the House and Senate committees responsible for solid waste oversight. And that's it. So I know that early on in this group, we had joked that this report could be short and sweet, and it can simply say, we helped advise EDS on the solid waste management plan. The plan has been issued, ta-da. We could do that, but I think actually what might be useful is for us to use the deadline of that report to get us to spell out these next topics that we want to make sure that we address next year. To basically say, here's what we've accomplished so far, and here's our plan for our next year of meetings. And so again, that list that we just talked about was waste characterization study, extended use responsibility, addressing out-of-state waste, looking at infrastructure, education, funding. And all of that timing fits in, yes?
Excuse me, make a suggestion, maybe
Yes.
instead of addressing out-of-state waste, we assess out-of-state waste.
Oh, yes,
And I think it's that the committee is looking at it, and looking at the problem rather than trying to, deciding what the problem really is, and if there is a problem, what it is. But I don't know, to me, addressing it means that we feel there's already, we can see the notion it's a problem, we're going to do something.
I see what you're saying, yes, so that will certainly get into, we can certainly look at language specifically.
Yeah.
I think the, quote that Representative Eagle had was that someone, I don't know who that someone is yet, perhaps Representative Eagle, perhaps you would be asking me for some help, but we need to have a rough draft of the report ready before our next meeting on November 18th. And then at that meeting, we can look carefully at that and talk about exactly how we want to characterize them.
Sure. All right.
Yeah. So, but in terms of sort of what are those topics we want to make sure that we look at and talk about in more depth over the next year, that's the list that I'm getting from our conversation. So last call, does anybody have anything else that they're thinking of right now in terms of big topics that isn't on that list that we want to make sure we look at sooner rather than later?
I don't have to add to the list, but to me, the report should also say what we've done to date. So it's more than just helping the salaries. I mean, to me, it's who's on the committee, how many times we met, we had subcommittees, we had different people come in to do education. I think that's all important as a report of what the committee has done. And then kind of leads into, here's the things that we want to start looking into. And I don't think the report needs to make any conclusions or recommendations other than we're set up, we did this, we accomplished this, and we're going to looking forward to going to school.
I support that, yes. I do know, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna note, I don't know, it may have been on the, enumerated, but maybe not. Picking up a little bit on what Steve talked about with regard to organics, I actually do think that given the things that have happened in surrounding states in Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine, there's an opportunity. There's a lot happening right now that's starting to keep its way into New Hampshire as a result of the advancements that those states have made. And I think certainly, if you look at organics, it is a significant portion of the waste stream. It has significant, methane generation risk that it poses in the landfill environment. Collect it all, and capture it all. So I think we can make some significant improvements with respect to how we manage organics. And I think putting that as a near-term topic to look at should be
I'm supportive of that. I sort of talked it over your waste characterization comment, but I agree. I think even before we get the results of the waste characterization study, we know the organics are very likely a very meaningful portion of what we're disposing of around this.
So the logistical thing, it's not on my calendar. That was the meeting that day.
My understanding,
we all have it.
my understanding is we have secured the room for November 18th. We haven't noticed that meeting yet. Not entirely sure why we didn't notice that meeting yet. I know it's on my calendar. I don't recall how I know it's on my calendar. But do others have November 18th on their calendar as our?
Right there.
Okay. I do know that, I think typically we would have met the following week, but that would be Thanksgiving, I think. So thinking was we would move our next meeting up, so hopefully folks are able to, come to a meeting on Friday, November 18th. At our next meeting, we would meet at 9 a.m. as usual. And the goal would be that someone will be having roughed out a draft report before that meeting, so that everyone can look at it before the meeting and then we can discuss it.
Yes. We'll get that finalized. I think we were waiting on official word from the working group that they were going to meet on that. I think the representative people had thought of that as a potential date, but there was no confirmation. So once the working group had decided, we don't notice it, get it out. Make sure that there's official posting.
I just want to lock the date in before people schedule over it, so.
One, in terms of if we were going to include any specific recommendations in our report, I know that Representative Eagle specifically on the topic of funding had wondered, for example, if we might get consensus on this group to recommend some appropriation to the solid waste management, some amount. Just recommended that it would come out of the general operating budget. She suggested perhaps $1 million. I don't know exactly if this group is wanting to at this point make any specific recommendations in that plan, or if we just want to basically lay out what we're going to be assessing next year. But I at least wanted to bring that up because that's something that she mentioned to me before the meeting.
I would go with the latter, no problem with recommending dollars. What's the basis for that? So we've got to feel that fair has. This is not comfortable doing that. These guys are fighting for general funding on a regular basis. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Well, I would say to be clear, so that the solid waste management fund was created, which is great, and it does spell out how we make grants to municipalities and others for infrastructure improvements that would advance waste reduction technologies and activities. Fund isn't very helpful for us if it has a zero balance, which is what it has right now. From my position, I'm not going to be in a position, I would abstain from a vote on that, but that's something that, we don't know where it will be, but I want this group to understand what we would do with that fund, its primary purpose is to provide funding for DES to make grants to like I say, municipalities or other individuals to advance their infrastructure for waste reduction. So it's clearly aligned with our goals and things that we want to do. It would be presumably, I did have a brief conversation with Representative Eagle about this. It would be a bill that would propose to appropriate from the general funds, or there are other sources that legislature choose that, not the option. Basically, appropriate funds separate and apart from our operating budget to put into this solid waste management fund for us to use in accordance with the statutory authorities that we've been given when the fund was created. I don't believe it would imperil our operating budget. The two would not be linked. The operating budget is part of the budget bill, H1, and then something like this would be I presume would be a separate bill unless it were incorporated into that. So it would be a separate bill that would rise or fall on its merits in the legislative process. Right. So these funds don't come out of your budget for this. This is a fund. That's certainly that's what I understood when I spoke to Representative Eagle. If the proposal was to take it out of our operating budget,
We've already set up the solid waste management.
The fund exists. The fund exists as a dedicated non-housing fund. It just doesn't just use one fund. Yeah.
And it could, in theory, be funded through one of those 3 upcoming EPA grants. There's one for recycling education.
Yeah, probably not, based on our conversations. Yeah, it sounds like they're not really able to just
Okay.
All right. I have a lot of funds that are not funded by personal budget.
I want to glad you might raise that because I knew some pros asked me. So when the solid waste management fund was created in the legislature, one of the things that was acknowledged was that there might be federal funds that we could accept. Would be a place to put those funds and administer. The problem is the funding that's going to be available right now under bipartisan infrastructure law doesn't appear to fit that scenario. So we can go after money, but it doesn't appear that we can go after any money that allow us to make grants to municipalities, as I just described. So it doesn't mean it won't happen in the future. The EPA is still growing this thing, trying to figure out what they want it to be. Certainly looks like first round of funding that they're going to issue here. It's a 5-year funding program. first round of funding is not gonna be something that we can take within that fund and then use in that way, but there's nothing to say that years from now, we're creating that. I mean, we have other EPA funds that we use for exactly that purpose, where we go after the grant, we give us the grant, and then we make sub-grants to municipalities. We do that in our brownfields programs very successfully. And we encourage EPA to look at that model when we talk to them. If this bill that Representative Eagle is considering were to pass, it would likely just create these funds, and we would still put them, we put them in the solid waste management fund and use them in that way. So that fits the model perfectly. But the idea that we're going to get federal funding for that in the near term is a good promise.
That's all. Any other thoughts on actually making recommendation for legislation to provide appropriation for this fund?
I would put it in the draft report for the 18th. Is the number suggested is after doing like thought it was coming out of his budget. Yeah, put it in right.
Would it be useful to have a few sentences, I'm not sure we can do this, of where that $1 million comes, you know what I mean? Throwing out a number is fine, but is there any basis, any preliminary thought that led to that number that might strengthen our recommendation?
We do not know, but we could certainly
See,
get
we could,
more
yeah.
information on that before our next meeting.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds good.
Yeah, I would just say that probably I would suggest you just be appropriated from general funds and let the legislature sort it out. That's it. Honestly, I don't know that you can do any better because unless you had some specific revenue source that we were trying, like many times we look at fertilizer fees and things like that. A lot of them, portions of it go to fund this program and that program, and the remainder goes to the general fund. I'm only throwing that out because that's what I'm particularly familiar with. Unless you had someplace else that you had some recommendation like that, where there was a revenue stream that's already coming in. Off the top of my head, I don't have one in mind. I don't know. Then I probably just need it to be appropriated.
Oh, I think I misunderstood. I thought you were wondering, what's the basis for asking for 1 million?
That's what I was,
It's a
yeah.
different
No.
dollar amount.
You
How
understood
did
me.
we arrive at that particular suggestion?
Maybe I misunderstood you.
Which I think would be.
Yeah, okay.
You understood me perfectly. I'm thinking something like we have this many million tons per year of solid waste coming in. And there's a national percentage of X that, goes to this sort of a fund, and that's why they're recommending $1 million. Where they get it from, we would not
Sorry,
there.
my misunderstanding.
Nowhere, just some background of where that number came from.
What I would do is basically brief conversation with Representative Eagle about this. It would be an amount that would be appropriated to the fund. We wouldn't have a deadline on it. So basically, we would then stand up a grant program for municipalities and other entities to basically say, here's the eligibility criteria, here's what you can do with this money. And if there was, a lot of demand for it, and a lot of great infrastructure projects that folks were looking to launch, might get used pretty quickly. If there weren't, might not. Maybe that one, is it a matching grant program? Is it a straight up thing? How would that work? So there'd be a lot of details in that.
And perhaps some of that money could be used towards infrastructure projects or education. I mean, these things, I'm thinking for the topics that we've identified as priorities for next year. Some of those would probably be eligible as possibilities under a grant program.
Sure, I mean, I think the vision is really a focus on infrastructure, allowing basic providing capital for municipalities to stimulate something, like for example, if a municipality wanted to start a food composting operation at their transfer station, there'd be certain capital costs associated with that. It's going to apply for it.
That would be my suggestion to you, is that you pick a topic, like organic diversion from landfills, ask ask for that. You know, ask for, this is what we've identified as something that will help us attain our goals. This would be a great way for the legislature to put some seed into this plan to help these communities, because we've identified that this will help. You get a very targeted approach like that, it will be much better received than if you just throw it out there for a grant program or whatever. You'll really want to justify something that, I think the organic waste is a great one to start with, honestly. I think it's something that could be, it's in every community. And it would be much more bipartisan. I think you get bipartisan support for it much easier than you would stop burn or all of it, or something like that. You know, because if you go with something that you can really explain, easily explain, and say, this is what we're going to use $1 million for, is to stand up these programs in the communities where we're seeing a huge impact on burning solid waste out of our landfills. I think that's a really easy discussion with them. Be a great way to start it.
And you think it would be better to be as narrow as saying only towards organics, or, I mean, I don't want to be,
There's a good plan is what I'm saying.
could it be, we just talk about infrastructure for solid waste reduction, composting? I guess.
I think my suggestion would be, with a plan of what the more details you have in the plan of how it's going to work, and more that a legislator can look at that and go back to the community and say, here's how we're going to help the community. This is a great idea, and it really help divert waste out of the landfills. It's a win all the way around. I think the more you get to there, the easier it is to come in and convince legislators that's a good idea. That's my thought. Because you're asking me to put money into a plan that came to the legislature. As I recall the conversation, and correct me if I'm wrong, the argument for the information that we received for setting up this fund was there was going to be no cost to the state, and it was about having a receivership for federal dollars. You know, a dedicated fund for federal dollars. I think that's my recollection of the conversation. Why I had to ask you what it was. And to go back next year and say, well, we've changed our mind, we want from the state dollars, it won't be received well by everyone. But if you come in with a real plan of, we've identified that this could really help us meet the goal, I think it would be a much better selling. Just my 2 cents.
Well, it's helpful, but, and we would be able to add that the reason why this group is coming with a recommendation for state funds to be put into that bucket is because the federal funds that were anticipated to be available are not in the short term going to be available for the use that we reached in.
And since we have the fund, we've identified this, that's our goal, and here's a real plan that we think, and here's how the money will be used, and here's what it would be, you know. And it also will help Mike to get DES and the ability to really define the program. We need that guidance from the legislature. I just think if you narrow it a bit, you'll get a little bit wider support if you do it right.
It makes sense. Do something more concrete to get their arms around.
It's not just, well, it's only $1 million and then, you know, that's what you don't.
Yeah, right.
I know that, if you go over around Walpole, it's like, sort of separated small facility forecast people. A lot of towns in New Hampshire that have similar populations. And I used to go over an house with that, which is it's not a separate program that they recycle, but they co-mingle. We get maximum value while we do multiple papers. We have a payback back system, so we get $120,000 in back sales per year. We get $80,000 in revenue from recycling. So we do really well financially in that system. We've got some people, and we're able to sort of separate. I think that in Elstead, we struggle with the fact that we don't have innovators to make the proper money that we could be making. The taxpayers affected, they look at things and say, why aren't we making, what local makes, or why aren't we doing as well as, we don't have enough failures, we don't have enough people that know what they're doing. So I mean, I just think that should be considered. There's enough people in the state that do things properly, do things correctly. There would be a better return for the taxpayer. It would make more sense. There's always going to be MSW going out and sitting away from towns to handle that. but, the system in Walpole, but it's just, to me, it's the way to do things for small town. And obviously you get over a certain amount of people, and I haven't dealt with that, so this might be the way to go. But for us, it's a perfect system. It makes sense to me, Walpole, and trying to implement that in elsewhere. So I think with some consideration for towns to get green balers, which I think is appropriate, and infrastructure to bail out things and ship them, give them money in return, recycle properly. And I think that's a selling point that we look into. Regardless of the background.
Yeah, quite as well. The idea of money for a baler is like quintessential examples we used for years to describe. But instead of helping it's right, it's simple, it works, it's changed the economics considerably. Certainly, including that as part of it, it is a way to describe this. More narrowly, so it's not wide open, but it's certainly something like that. I wouldn't envision that think that that's something that if we had a grant program to help municipalities, we expect to have these. So the way to integrate that into it, that probably makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, pick a topic, that was my, it doesn't have to be organics, I kind of just, what as we had.
I think you could enumerate maybe 2 or 3 things that are the focus of the grant program, and those could be among them. I think that would be that's something that I think this group, further discussion, really developed a good, maybe some language to develop that.
Yeah, and I like the idea of thinking of how can we identify a few areas and not be so restrictive, because while organics is a really important one, it's sort of to the point was raised earlier, it could take many years for enough communities or businesses to even get interested in applying for funds just in organics, because it is such an area where there's a lot of need and being a lot of ground covered. But if we could also include some very specific things related to recycling, perhaps, like balers, those are quick, easy wins that this grant program could then fund in short, which I think could also be a good thing. We wouldn't want to have this money at DEF and then have it not be allowed.
Well, in focus, maybe looking at, because it is a relatively narrow set of topics, this is going to be a grant program that focuses on helping municipalities improve their local infrastructure for innovation.
And I didn't mean to say it has to be one topic. I'm sorry if I came across it. It could be 2 or 3 things. But just keep it, again, just don't go ask for $1 million again to give it to DES and figure out how they want to give up grants. That won't sell. That would be a very hard sell. It would be much better if you have identified programs like this. Here's some 2 or 3, I don't care if it's 5 different topics that this group has identified that really help community, will work well, and here's the benefit to New Hampshire, the general good of the population. Here's how we can help. That's a great selling.
Here's a thought. Talk about organics, talk about other materials. Just looking at page 7 here. If you just focus on infrastructure improvements to address food waste or plastics, that's 55% more focus. So if you target activities that would pull out organics, do something to further recycle, segregate, manage plastics and paper, that's over 50% of the waste. So if you do that, we'll start to make then we'll think down those steps. So I guess what I'm saying is go beyond organics. Now to identify specifically, but yeah.
My hesitation with, say, narrowing which recyclables is that I can imagine we might get into the situation where a community says, all right, well, we want to do baler, and we're going to use it for multiple commodities. We'll certainly use it to bale cardboard, but we're also going to use it to bale cardboard cans and some other things. And seen them get a little tricky sometimes where, New Hampshire Beautiful, for example, has a grant program. And they like to fund certain types of, recycling initiatives. And applicants have to be very clear about if they want an item that can be used for multiple purposes, they have to be very clear that it will be primarily used for recycling. So, I just want to think about how that might complicate things for,
I mean, we can deal with this before, but I think Representative Pearl's point is good. We just came in, he just came in to establish this fund, and now we're coming back, we're not narrowing it.
yes.
You might get this, or if you're trying to put something out there that may have a greater chance of success. If years go on, expand on, funding sources, what gets covered.
Question,
Could the fund look at, how we might do things differently? I mean, then with all due respect to your program, I live in Walpole, pay Walpole taxes, and, I support the facility. But I understand that, your system is actually a small little miracle, given the fact, largely led by volunteers and whatnot. But, I don't think that, yes, they have a funding mechanism set up, but it's not an efficient way of handling waste in general. I mean, for a small town, I understand that, but I mean, and the value of a small town facility is not in what they process, it's the social gathering component. That's the important part of a small town recycling facility. But if you were to look at the per ton cost of diverting a ton of recycling through a small town like that, because they have very little in the way of mechanical assistance, it would blow your head off. I wonder if the funds could help bring in, expertise from outside, because people always, love outside expertise, in solutions, to suggest, here's how you might approach this differently, as a whole, versus looking at this thing, each, 1,500 person community in town. I mean, the example that I use is that, we have had household hazardous waste collections in my community for almost 28 years now. We have 24 collections a year, and it's reasonably well funded. But I mean, the simple fact of the matter is, if we were ever truly successful at diverting hazardous waste, we wouldn't be able to afford the program. I mean, it makes us feel good to have these things, but it's not really an efficient and economical way to address solid waste problems. To me, small towns probably ought to be, just small transfer stations that are sending materials to a larger facility that are better built for the economies of scale to deal with this issue on a macro scale. So I just wonder if maybe there could be, some kind of process. And I don't ever want to get rid of small town facilities because of the social aspect. It's important for local communities to have those gathering points. But at least taking a look at, whether this is efficient and economical, I think at least bears some looking.
so I think maybe the bigger question is, and this was going to be a clarifying question I had, was that the fund that was already established, or the bucket that's already been established, and the empty fund that's been established, is it already specified that fund can be used for municipalities or businesses or anything, or like? Because I think what I'm mostly mishearing is we're thinking about limiting it to municipal use. Duncan's bringing the suggestion of allowing funding for outside people.
I have to go back and check. I think it actually may be limited to municipalities. No, it's not.
I thought it was larger.
I couldn't remember where we landed because we worked on that during the bill, and
I thought that it was going to include businesses because there was the desire to get the support for businesses to support the fund.
that's, I'll be honest, I was trying to remember because we had earlier legislation that clearly made that possible. And I wasn't sure if it got narrowed when this one was. Like it's almost always.
If we're going to recommend putting money into this fund, we need to be clear about what that fund is already restricted to, or.
That's easy enough for us.
Okay.
I will say, I think that really taking to heart Representative Pearl's guidance is really valuable. I think keeping this initial attempt to get funding narrow, and maybe even narrowing it to municipalities. The need is great there. I mean, we're here for one person here, and I think that kind of getting it launched based on that would be fine. Then, you know, hopefully that leads to bigger and greater things in the future once we show a track record of success in administering those grants and having them be successfully used to move into.
I would be supportive of that. I guess the procedural question in my mind is, if that fund was established to support municipalities and businesses, is it a problem if this group would be recommending an appropriation of money that would have a narrower scope? Would that be a problem? I don't know.
I think that's a fair question.
So I think who can help us answer that question before our next meeting?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Right on the sidebar here, but the thought would be that if you look at the difficulties of going at the legislature and asking for a general fund appropriation, in my experience, certainly when we do that on behalf of specifically the municipalities, we bring in a really important support. HMA comes in and uses the support of something. We could help to get this launched in early going. That's all.
Oh, yes. I agree. I mean, I am supportive of, I'm personally supportive of limiting it to municipalities, at least in the first iteration. It's just the question of, if the fund was established to support municipalities and businesses, are we then going to be able to use that fund and narrow the use of that money just for municipalities?
I guess just a mechanical answer to that would be that, you know, we have a number of funds that may have a broad legislative authorities that we're able to use it for, but it's not at all uncommon to get individual appropriations of money that have a much narrower focus. And we have, you know, the accounting systems necessary to ensure that they're accounting for that properly and only using the money for the intended purposes. So mechanically, administratively, I don't think that we have a problem with that, and it's not following the ground when it comes to funds that we get.
In the future, another appropriation of money could come in just for businesses, for example. So just to reiterate what we've talked about covering in our report so far, so that drafting this report will not be onerous. We'll talk about what was on the group, talk about how many times we met, talk about the different maybe perhaps topics and presentations we had. We'll talk about our involvement in helping advise DES on developing a solid waste management plan. And then the next half of the report can be looking ahead, and then we want to, over the next year, specifically delve into more closely topics of waste characterization study, which hopefully we will find out soon that the state can get funding from the EPA to pursue that. We want to make sure we're supportive of that. Want to talk about EPR, talk about out-of-state waste, talk about infrastructure, education, and funding. And then specific to funding, we'd like to include a recommendation of some sort to appropriate a certain amount of money from the general fund to provide grants for infrastructure, and we will narrow that down a bit more at our next meeting. Is that anything else we should cover in our report list? I don't want to be naive, but that sounds like a reasonably feasible report that we can draft together without too much time. So I'll go ahead and volunteer myself to assist Representative Eagle with taking a crack at the first draft, with the commitment that we'll all have a draft in advance of the next meeting. So, last official thing on our agenda is to talk about our future meetings. We will be moving forward with our next meeting on Friday, November 18th, so we'll have time to look at that draft report. We provide input so we can finalize that and we can then get it submitted before the end of the month or by the end of the month. Representative Eagle recommended that we just don't have the meeting in December. We take a break, and then we can kick off again likely in January. My understanding was that last time we had reserved the room, but then we also noticed a bunch of meetings in advance, and then if we skipped a meeting, that was problematic for, I'm looking at Mike North here. Would it be a good idea for us to set an entire schedule for 2022 and notice that, or is it better for us to reserve the rooms and not notice too many meetings out in the future? My understanding is there was some logistical challenge with that.
There's always logistical either way.
Okay.
I think for the group's benefit, it's probably better to have a schedule set so people can, and then if we need to change that, then we just adjust what we notice. Or what we
Okay. All right. Would we like to continue setting aside, we're typically doing the last Friday of each month from 9 to 3 meeting here? Do we want to plan for that? Not in the noon, if not less.
Just making sure.
Would we want to plan on that schedule for next year, understanding that we'll need to, take a peek if it conflicts with any major holidays? And just stick with that. Plan on meeting whatever that January is.
27.
Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. And what we can do is actually draft up that official meeting schedule for 2022. And maybe confirm that at our next meeting. So I'm sure we'll have a few adjustments we want to look at major holidays or something. Great.
Then the intent will always be in this room.
And then who knows, maybe we will determine that we'll need to have additional sort of subcommittees again, once we, delve into these future topics. I don't know, that might be something to consider. The last thing, unless anyone had anything else to add, yes,
Can I jump
please.
in one second?
Yes.
You may have talked about this before, I got my apologies. I'm not certain what my future will be on this particular group, because I am the representative to the New Hampshire House. I'm not running for a House. So I don't know that I'll be back here. I will be on the 18th, but after that, I'm uncertain that I'll be back here. I'm running for state Senate seat. Senator Gray and I, presuming we both are successful, I'm not sure which one of us will be back here, honestly. It totally depends on the leadership of the respective part of the legislature. I'm not exactly sure where that I'll be back here again after the 18th.
Okay, and thank you. Senator Gray had mentioned that.
Okay.
And had just explained that subject to,
Right.
your elections, it would be unclear, it's uncertain if you vote will be continued.
Exactly. We serve through December 6th.
Okay.
Once we, depending on the elections, whoever goes in there, but I won't be here as a House member.
Right.
Anyway, because I'm not running for House.
So you certainly would not be staying on this group in your current representative
Correct.
role. It's possible you could be coming back, filling a Senate role.
I think that if I'm elected to the Senate, they could swap us out for me as a senator, or he may stay, or I don't,
Right.
That's the fun part of what we.
So what we do know is that we can expect to still have a House representative and a Senate representative.
There will.
Serving on this group, it might change.
So what I will do is reach out to the speaker after this meeting, and just have a conversation with him so that I understand, and if he, he's going to have to name someone else for a House member, and my suggestion might be that I guess he probably wouldn't want to do so until after the November meeting anyway. So I'm not sure what's, but I'll certainly work with the member, his name is the House member, if there's anything that they need to bring him up to speed. It's been a pleasure being with all of you, and we'll see hopefully on beyond that, I'm not sure.
Okay, and thank you for clarifying that. So hopefully, since we're not meeting in December, hopefully we would be able, if there are any changes, we would be able to have those representatives joining us for our by end of January.
Hopefully, it's a bit hectic in December and early January after an election because of new chairs that have to be named. There's a lot that happens, along with holidays. It's possible. I'm not sure that, the solid waste working group appointment might rise to that level to get in that quickly, but who knows?
Okay, all right, that's good to keep in mind, thank you. And it is my understanding, if I remember correctly, that Representative Evil has been appointed in her individual capacity by DES as a member of this committee.
She's a member at large, right?
Right, so regardless of her election status, my understanding is that she would be able to continue.
I believe that's that as well. I think it's Senator Gray and myself that are sort of
Yep.
two wild cards.
Yep, and then also hopefully we'll have someone new for the public in state position for our June. If not the November meeting. So, any other thoughts about future meetings or scheduling? So just the last thing I wanted to make sure we at least added on the agenda briefly was just any updates from the group. I mean, one of the things that I want to just mention in case folks aren't aware is that in the last 3 months, general pricing for recyclables has really decreased considerably. So the Northeast Resource Recovery Association just issued an article on our website a few days ago, sort of explaining some of the information that we've been hearing from different groups about this and the impacts that we're seeing on communities. But the very short story is that as the Federal Reserve is increasing the reserve rate and increasing interest rates for borrowing funds in order to try and cool off inflation and cool off the economy, we're also seeing the price of recyclable commodities by and large dropping considerably. And so right now there are some communities that have reached out to us who have, for example, curbside single stream recycling, and they're actually seeing that their costs of recycling are now going to be higher than their cost of disposal right now, just because of the really dramatic change in markets in the last few months. Of course, recycling markets, they go up, they go down. The hope is that this is going to be a temporary downturn, but I just wanted to make sure that that everyone was aware of that, because certainly we received some concerned communications from some communities who didn't see this coming. Really, that's more dramatically impacting communities that do have single stream recycling, that's tied to an index, which is what most contracts are tied to these days. And so as the overall value of recyclable material falls, typically their costs are increasing. And then of course communities that source separate them, like Walpole and others, they are getting less revenues for some of their material. I'd say that the item that is most problematic that that we're also seeing through our work is mixed paper. So we know that some communities, they're having to pay to recycle their mixed paper. And if they're having to pay more than the cost of disposal, we're going to see some communities opting to temporarily dispose of their mixed paper, just for the financial reasons. So I just want to make sure folks were kind of aware of that, because it happened pretty quickly, and so I think it's causing folks.
Why?
Well, so.
Is that the only thing that is due to full inflation on commodities?
So, also, there are a lot of factors. There was a great presentation at the Northeast Recycling Council's Regional Recycling Markets Committee. And one of the things that they talked about was just the challenge of retailers and manufacturers in predicting this economy during its sort of post-pandemic, if you can call it post-pandemic. It's just really hard for them to predict how much material they have on stock, what demand is going to be. And so, we're seeing that a lot of individuals are paying more for services than goods. And, we've got retailers who have oversupply, and so they just don't need more, you don't need more cardboard boxes if suddenly you have things sitting on your shelves and aren't moving as quickly. And in the past, it has not been uncommon for the value of cardboard in particular to be sort of an early indicator of the future economy. If that is true in this case, it's not a good sign that the price of cardboard has been dropping dramatically, because there are some concerns that recession might be coming. by no means a guarantee. But there's just a variety of factors, but certainly part of it is that the economy has been slowing down a bit. It's hitting recyclable markets faster. I don't know if others have more to add to that.
I think Stella in Springfield is one. So I don't know how many more we tap into that, but that's a useful thing.
Is that a contract thing? Because there's other cities that are looking to renew contracts, and those kind of provisions are going.
Yes. I've seen that as well.
Yeah, I don't know how much capability they have in business.
We're seeing some companies that are not able to market mixed paper.
The economics when they set the contract are very different.
Yes. Yes. Anybody else have any updates that they want to share? All right, well, I'm never going to object to wrapping up the meeting again early. I want to thank everybody very much for coming today and participating, and look forward to seeing everybody on the 18th.
Great job. Yeah, thank you for leading us.
Yeah.